He sat quietly on the bench all season, never played a single minute. What he did in the final game left the crowd in stunned silence and left his coach questioning everything. The late afternoon sun hung low over Fairview Academy, casting golden rays across the school's outdoor basketball court. Dust floated lazily in the air, shimmering in the honeyed light like suspended time. The court, cracked at the edges from my years of wear, buzzed with quiet energy, just under the surface. Inside the gym, the light was different. It filtered through the high windows in shafts of amber, streaking across polished floors and gleaming off the iron rims. Yet the warmth outside never quite made it in. The atmosphere here was tense, still, as if everyone were holding their breath. On the far end of the bench stood Coach Tom Reynolds, clipboard under his arm, whistle around his neck. In his late 40s, with silver creeping into his temples and lines carved deep across his brow, Tom carried the air of a man who didn't just run a basketball team, he ruled it. He had been at Fairview for nearly 15 years. Known for discipline, tradition, and a no-nonsense coaching style, he was the kind of man who believed that sweat, silence, and sacrifice were virtues. He wasn't cruel, but he was unwavering. He prided himself on being fair, but many quietly disagreed on what that meant. And then there was Jamal Carter. 17, tall and lean with a graceful strength, Jamal moved like water. On the court, he was electric, his instincts sharp, his vision impeccable. He could drive to the basket like lightning or arc a three-pointer that sliced through the air with poetry. Yet off the court, he was quiet, polite, a young man who carried himself with the cautious self-awareness of someone who had been taught to stay small in the wrong places. Fairview was a predominantly white school in a comfortable Georgia suburb, its manicured lawns and red brick buildings giving the illusion of harmony. But Jamal knew that even the nicest places could press down hard on those who didn't quite fit their mold. He and Terrence, the only other black player on the team, often exchanged wordless glances when certain jokes were made, or when Coach Tom gave them that look after a missed pass. Still, Jamal never complained. He came early, stayed late, and let his game do the talking. For most of the season, that had been enough. The team had made it to the state championship, first time in nearly a decade. And no one doubted why. They had Jamal. His name had become a whisper of both admiration and anxiety among rival schools. Parents clapped a little louder when he scored. Teammates joked that he was a one-man highlight reel. Scouts had started to show up. Even Coach Tom had started calling him kid instead of son, a subtle sign of respect. But something had shifted in the last week. At practice, Coach Tom's compliments grew scarce. His eyes lingered longer on Jamal's decisions. He barked more. The praise faded. One practice, he pulled Jamal aside after a perfect scrimmage. "Too flashy," he said. "You're not here to show off, Carter. Play the system, not your style." Jamal nodded, but inside the words stung. He had followed the plays, passed when he should, scored when it counted. Still, he swallowed it, like he always did. Now, 3 days before the championship game, the team was gathered for a final closed-door practice. The court was silent, save for the bounce of the ball and the squeak of sneakers. Jamal stood at the edge, warming up, waiting for his name in the starting five. But it never came. Starting lineup: Carson, Dylan, Max, Luke, and Terrence. Coach barked, eyes never touching Jamal. A beat of silence. Jamal froze, ball in hand. He glanced around. Carson looked confused. Terrence looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Jamal walked slowly to the bench, sitting down without a word. No explanation came. No one dared ask. The other players avoided his gaze. Only the sound of drills filled the void. Outside, the sunlight began to fade into softer tones. But inside, the air thickened. Jamal sat quietly, elbows on knees, watching his team run plays. He didn't frown, didn't slouch. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, deep and steady, were locked on every movement, as if he was studying something only he could see. No one knew why he'd been benched. Some whispered about a missed class. Others guessed at attitude. But Jamal had done everything right. Everything, except be the kind of player Coach Reynolds could fully understand. And yet not once did Jamal protest. Not once did he ask why. Instead, he just kept watching and waiting, while the golden light outside the gym turned slowly to amber, then to shadow. Everyone expected Jamal to lead them in the championship. They just didn't know how. The gym was quiet after practice ended, eerily quiet. The usual laughter, the towel snapping, the echoes of sneakers sprinting one last time across the hardwood, all of it was gone. Only the sound of a single ball thudding rhythmically against the floor remained. Jamal stayed behind. The court, now bathed in a wash of fluorescent lights, felt like a stage emptied after the show. The bleachers stood in silence, bearing witness as Jamal dribbled, shot, retrieved. Again and again, alone. Coach Tom hadn't spoken to him once after announcing the final starting five. No explanation, no eye contact. Just one sharp call for a water break, a review of defensive schemes, and then the final whistle. And all the while, Jamal sat on the bench, his face unreadable, like a statue carved out of calm and confusion. Inside, he burned. He had run the drills, lifted in the weight room, studied the plays longer than anyone else. He had become the backbone of the team, whether coach said it or not. But now, with the most important game of the season approaching, he was benched, without a word. He shot, again. The ball arced high, kissed the rim, and dropped cleanly through the net. He caught it, pivoted, shot again. A routine he knew better than most knew breathing. Each movement was tight, deliberate, focused, almost meditative. But behind the precision was something heavier, frustration, confusion, and something deeper he didn't want to name. As he trained in silence far down the hallway, whispers were already beginning to move. In the locker room, Carson leaned in toward Max, his voice low. He probably mouthed off to coach or something. He's been acting weird. Max frowned. Nah, man, Jamal doesn't talk back. Ever. Maybe he skipped class? Maybe, Carson said, but his tone lacked certainty. He's always kind of doing his own thing, you know? Across the room, Terrence sat quietly, earbuds in, staring at the floor. He had seen it coming. Not exactly this, but the signs. The narrowed eyes. The curt tone. The way coach always emphasized team play when Jamal lit up the court. And the word he used more than any other. Reckless. It wasn't the first time Coach Tom had said it. Back in November, when Jamal pulled a spin move into a no-look pass for a game-winning 3. The crowd had gone wild, but in the locker room afterward, Coach hadn't congratulated him. He just said, "Let's not get cute, Carter. That kind of flash wins crowds, not games." Jamal had smiled politely, nodded, but Terrence had seen the way his jaw tightened. There was always something in Coach's tone when he spoke to Jamal, a measured restraint, like he was trying to keep control of something he didn't fully trust. During conditioning drills, Coach often made offhand remarks. "You're fast, but can you be consistent? Don't rely on raw talent, son. That's how you get lazy." Or once, after Jamal had carried the team to a 10-point comeback, "Discipline wins games, not hero ball." To anyone else, it may have sounded like coaching. But to Jamal, the message had been clear. You're good, but not the right kind of good. And now he was benched. The next morning, Jamal walked the halls with his hood up, books tucked under one arm. Conversations hushed when he passed. Someone had posted on the team's group chat, "Did Jamal get dropped for showing off too much? He got an attitude?" No one said anything to his face, but the silence spoke volumes. Jamal didn't react, didn't explain. He sat in the back of class, took notes, kept his head down. Even at lunch, when Terrence tried to ask him what was going on, Jamal just gave a small shrug. "I'm good," he said, his voice calm. "Just playing my role." That night, he was back in the gym again. The janitor left the lights on for him. He didn't have to ask anymore. It had become their quiet agreement. He trained harder than ever. but not like someone trying to prove a point. Like someone preparing for something only he could see coming. His notebook sat on the bleachers beside his bag, pages open, filled, with sketches of defensive rotations, breakdowns of opponent tendencies, notes written in tight, slanted handwriting. To the world, it looked like Jamal had been silenced. But inside, something was growing. He wasn't angry. Not in the way people expected. Not the kind of anger that lashed out or broke things. It was quieter, steadier, the kind that forged steel. He didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. He wanted to show, not that they were wrong, but that they hadn't even known what to look for. So he kept working, kept watching. Let the rumors swell like a storm overhead. Because deep down, Jamal knew something they didn't. The moment was coming. And when it did, they'd finally see him. Not the version coach had boxed, and not the whispers in the hall, but the player he truly was. And the silence? It wouldn't last forever. The arena pulsed with noise, every seat filled, every cheer echoing like waves against the metal rafters above. A sea of school colors shimmered in the stands, blue and gold for Fairview, crimson and white for their rivals, East Ridge High. The championship banner hung overhead, flanked by bright lights and the thundering bass of pre-game hype music. It was the kind of scene young players dream about, but in the middle of it all, Jamal Carter sat still. On the edge of the Fairview bench, hoodie half-zipped over his warm-up jersey, he stared out at the court, calm as stone. His hands rested, loosely on his knees, a small notebook tucked discreetly beside him. No one on the team acknowledged it, but he kept it close, fingers occasionally brushing over it like a secret waiting to be told. The starting lineup had been announced. His name hadn't been called. Again. As the teams took the floor, whispers rippled across the stadium like a low wind. Why isn't Jamal starting? Is he injured? Suspended, maybe? He's right there. That doesn't make sense. From the announcer's booth to the bleachers, confusion spread. Even the opposing fans seemed puzzled. Everyone knew Fairview's season had been built on one name, Carter, and yet here he was, benched. The game tipped off under the afternoon sun filtering through the skylights above, casting long bars of golden light across the court. For a few minutes, everything moved fast. Too fast. Fairview scrambled, missing passes, throwing up rushed shots. East Ridge played with sharp precision, their rhythm tight and calculated. By the end of the first quarter, they were up by 9. Coach Tom paced the sideline like a caged animal. His voice barked commands that fell apart before they could be followed. Every mistake turned his face a deeper shade of red. His clipboard slammed against his palm, and yet still he didn't look Jamal's way. From the bench, Jamal watched it all unfold, not with resentment, but with sharp, surgical attention. His eyes scanned every movement, every gap in East Ridge's defense, every misstep by his own team. To an outsider, he looked passive, removed. But inside, he was unraveling the game like a puzzle. He noticed it first when East Ridge's point guard, number 3, failed to rotate after a screen. Again on the next possession when their center overcommitted and left the baseline exposed. Patterns, repetition, tiny cracks in the armor. He reached for his notebook. With careful practice fingers, he flipped to a clean page and began to write. Not just words, but symbols, arrows, sketches. A language of his own, a silent playbook. Terrence, seated 2 spots away, glanced over but said nothing. He saw it too, the way Jamal's eyes narrowed when the defense sagged on the left, the way his pencil moved the moment East Ridge switched to a half-court trap. Still, Coach Tom didn't turn around. By halftime, the scoreboard read East Ridge 42, Fairview 28, a 14-point deficit. The Fairview crowd had gone quieter now, their chants weaker, their flags drooping. Even the school band slowed its rhythm. In the locker room, Coach stormed in like a thundercloud, throwing his clipboard onto the bench. "What the hell are we doing out there?" he growled. "You're letting them walk all over you." No one spoke. He launched into a barrage of corrections, adjustments, intensity. He scribbled plays on the whiteboard, his marker squeaking with aggression. And through it all, Jamal sat in the corner, head low, notebook in hand. Silent. Invisible. Coach Maya stood quietly near the door, arms crossed. Her eyes kept flicking toward Jamal, then back to the chaos. She wanted to speak, but not yet. Back, on the court as the second half began, nothing changed. East Ridge extended their lead. Fairview's passes were frantic. Their shots rushed. The team played like they were trying to outrun doubt and failing. And still Jamal sat. From his seat, he watched Mark 22 from East Ridge always drift too far after the inbound, leaving the far corner unguarded. He watched their coach rely too heavily on man coverage, even when it was clear the Fairview offense couldn't handle pressure. His pencil moved again. He sketched out a play, triangle motion with a reverse screen and kick to the wing. A counter to the trap, a gap in the zone. His face showed no anger, only purpose. Behind him, the bench stirred. One assistant leaned toward Coach Tom. "We're running out of time." Tom didn't answer. His jaw clenched. His pride was a weight around his neck, still refusing to look behind him, to the player who had been quietly preparing, watching, learning the game in a way no clipboard could capture. The mystery grew. Fans in the stands were no longer just confused. They were agitated. Murmurs turned into questions. The student section began chanting Jamal's name in slow, rising unison. "Jamal! Jamal!" He didn't react. He didn't wave. He didn't turn. Instead, he watched. Still. Eyes sharp, breathing slow. Because Jamal wasn't waiting to be given a moment. He was waiting for the moment, the exact one where everything shifted, where preparation met opportunity. And when that moment came, he wouldn't just enter the game. He would change it. The locker room buzzed with a quiet that stung harder than yelling. Players slumped in their seats, sweat glistening on their brows, jerseys clinging to their backs. No one looked each other in the eye. The whiteboard in front of them was cluttered with half-erased plays and arrows pointing nowhere. The only thing louder than the sound of the overhead fan was the silence sitting in their chests. Down by 15. The scoreboard outside felt less like a number and more like a judgment. Coach Tom stood by the door, arms crossed over his chest, lips pressed into a tight, unmoving line. His eyes weren't on the players, they were locked on the floor, on the loss, creeping in, 1 minute at a time. Near the back of the room, Coach Maya leaned against the lockers, arms folded. Her posture was calm, but her eyes, piercing, dark, steady, never left Tom. She had watched the entire first half from the bench. The chaos, the breakdown, the lack of rhythm. She'd seen the confusion in the players' eyes. And she'd watched Jamal, stone still, eyes tracking everything like a strategist in war. Now she stepped forward, quiet, but firm. Her voice barely above a whisper, but each word landed like a hammer. "You're not just losing the game, Tom," she said. "You're proving them right." Tom's jaw tensed. He didn't respond. Not yet. But she kept going. They've been saying it all season, that he's too flashy, too unpredictable, too much of a risk. And you're showing them you agree, even if it costs us everything. A few players glanced up, unsure if they were supposed to be hearing this. Coach Maya lowered her voice just enough for only him to hear the next line. "This isn't about control anymore. It's about pride." Tom's lips parted slightly, his breath hitched, not from anger but from something else. Recognition. His eyes drifted, almost involuntarily, to the far bench, to Jamal, still sitting quietly, still not asking for anything. His notebook now closed on his lap, his face unreadable, his silence louder than any protest. Tom let out a long breath, slow, unsteady. "Carter," he finally said. Jamal looked up. "Suit up. You're in. Third quarter." The room turned. Players sat up straighter, heads swiveled. Even Terrence blinked, unsure if he'd heard it right. Jamal didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just rose, like a tide. He took off his hoodie in one smooth motion and stepped forward. His hands were steady, his breath calm, but his eyes burned like coals under water, controlled, quiet, and unstoppable. When they emerged from the tunnel, the air hit like thunder. The crowd saw him and roared, "Jamal! Jamal!" His name echoed across the rafters like a war cry. But he didn't acknowledge it, didn't raise a fist or grin at the noise. He simply walked to the scorer's table and waited, stretching his arms in slow, fluid movements. As he checked in, one of the East Ridge players scoffed. "Took you long. Enough show-off," he muttered. Jamal didn't answer. The buzzer sounded. He stepped onto the court and the game changed. The first possession, he didn't shoot. He passed. Clean, sharp, purposeful. A no-look feed to Terrence cutting baseline. 2 points. Crowd on their feet. Next play, he drove, then kicked out to Carson on the wing. 3. Swish. But it wasn't just the scoring, it was the tempo. The team moved differently when he was on the court. With him came a kind of rhythm, like jazz, controlled chaos, calculated freedom. Suddenly passes connected, cuts made sense, screens hit harder. Jamal read the floor like sheet music. He saw where defenders would be before they moved. He spotted the mismatch and exploited it, not with showboating but with absolute control. Midway through the third quarter, Fairview had cut the lead from 15 to 7. Coach Tom stood still on the sidelines, stunned. The plays weren't his anymore. This was something else, something improvisational, instinctive, alive. But it worked, and the crowd? They could feel it. East Ridge called a timeout. Their coach barked orders, confused by the shift. Meanwhile, Jamal returned to the bench for water. Coach Tom looked at him for the first time, not with scrutiny, not with tension, but with something like clarity. Jamal wiped his face with a towel. Coach hesitated. Then he said quietly, "What did you see out there?" Jamal met his eyes. "Calm. They're overcommitting, especially number 3 on the switch. The baseline's open every third possession. Your motion offense works better if we stagger the left post." Tom blinked. Jamal added, "I drew something up. It's in the book." Tom looked down at the notebook Jamal had placed beside the bench. Slowly he picked it up. Diagrams. Notes. Full plays. Detailed. Accurate. Smart. He looked back at Jamal. For the first time, he truly saw him, not just the athlete, but the mind. The leader. The silence between them said everything. "Run it," Tom finally said. Jamal nodded once, not with ego, but understanding. As he walked back onto the court, the arena trembled beneath their feet. Because Jamal Carter wasn't just back in the game, now it was his. The fourth quarter began with the sound of sneakers skidding like thunder across the hardwood, and the court underlights felt less like a gym and more like a stage trembling before a storm. And Jamal Carter? He didn't explode onto the court with ego. He didn't bark orders. He didn't take the first shot. He orchestrated. With every possession, he moved like a conductor, eyes sweeping across the floor, reading defenders like they were sheet music in his hands. He dribbled not to show off, but to shift the defense, to bait their weight to one side before slinging a laser pass into the opposite corner. It was quiet brilliance. He passed more than he shot, always making the right play. A bounce pass threaded through 2 defenders timed so perfectly it felt like telepathy. A behind-the-back dish that didn't even require his teammate to slow down. A full-court bullet that landed in Terrence's hands like a gift, resulting in a clean layup and a whistle-blowing foul. Each time the ball left Jamal's hands, it was as if he'd whispered, "I trust you." And something strange happened. The team, rattled, fractured just a quarter ago, transformed. Carson, who had been ice-cold all game, suddenly couldn't miss. Terrence's defense turned ferocious, stripping the ball and feeding it right back to Jamal in transition. Even the bench players stood taller, voices louder, backs straighter. Jamal wasn't lifting the ball, he was lifting the entire team. The crowd felt it too. What began as cautious hope turned into a full, trembling roar. Every time the scoreboard crept closer, 8 points, 5, 3, the sound swelled like a rising wave. And still, Jamal didn't steal the spotlight. He waved off isolation plays. He told Carson to keep shooting. He pointed at the floor, telling younger players where to stand, how to move, when to cut. By the time the final minute ticked in, Fairview down by 1, the crowd was on its feet. Hundreds of fans chanting, screaming, praying. Coach Tom said nothing now. He just watched, notebook still in hand, eyes flicking between the court and the pages, Jamal's pages. With 34 seconds on the clock, Fairview forced a turnover. Jamal caught the ball at half court and didn't call a timeout. He already knew what to do. He let the clock wind down, dribbling patiently, scanning the defense like a general watching soldiers shift on a battlefield. East Ridge dropped in 2, a tight man coverage, wary now, terrified even. Jamal had already beaten them with vision, with patience, with unselfishness. They expected him to go for it this time, and why wouldn't he? He had earned it. The crowd held its breath as he crossed. The arc, 10 seconds. He feinted left, then drove right, blazing speed, one defender stumbling behind. He soared past the free throw line, legs coiled. He rose. The gym exploded. Everyone knew it was coming. Jamal, elevating for the dunk that would seal his name in Fairview history, the hero's ending, a moment worthy of every highlight reel. But, at the peak of his jump, he twisted midair. He turned not toward the rim but away from it and released the ball. A pass, a perfect feather-light dish to the corner baseline. The ball landed in the hands of Eli Monroe, a freshman barely used all season. The same kid who sat at the far end of the bench, always first in drills, always last to play. His eyes went wide for half a heartbeat. Then he shot. Clean. Swish. The buzzer followed 1 second later. Fairview 71, East Ridge 70 when the crowd erupted. The gym shook. Players sprinted off the bench. Towels flew. Terrence lifted Eli onto his shoulders while Carson grabbed Jamal in a tight, almost stunned embrace. Coach Tom didn't yell or throw his clipboard. He just smiled. Stunned. Moved. Jamal stood near the half-court logo, hands on his hips, not even winded. The crowd chanted his name over and over, but he didn't raise his arms, didn't point to the sky. He just looked at Eli, still dazed, smiling like he'd just been handed the eye, whirled and nodded. That was the moment, not the dunk, not the comeback, but that choice. To take everything he had, the spotlight, the pressure, the glory, and hand it, gently and deliberately, to someone else. And in that pass, Jamal Carter did something no stat sheet could ever measure. He didn't just win the game. He taught everyone watching what greatness really looked like. The gym had emptied, but the echoes of victory lingered in the air like the scent of sweat and adrenaline. Confetti, some of it hastily thrown student program flyers, still fluttered around the floor, and shoe scuffs streaked the hardwood like battle scars. The scoreboard, now frozen in time, still blazed the final score. Fairview 71, East Ridge 70. In the locker room, laughter mingled with disbelief. Players exchanged stories as if the final minutes had happened in a dream. Like, they needed to say it out loud to believe it. Terrence had his jersey half off, pacing with an energy he couldn't contain. Eli sat on the bench staring at his shoes, still trying to process that his shot had won the championship, and in the corner, seated calmly with his notebook on his lap, was Jamal. He wasn't saying much. He didn't need to. His presence radiated something deeper than pride. It was a stillness earned not just from the win, but from something harder, something quieter, restraint. Coach Tom stood near the whiteboard, surrounded by reporters now filtering in, recorders, in-hand cameras clicking. Coach Maya watched from the side, her expression soft, the corners of her mouth just barely turned up. They wanted Jamal, and he didn't resist. He stood when called, walking slowly into the press area where the Fairview High logo hung behind a fold-out table. The spotlight returned to him, not from the scoreboard now, but from the world outside. Reporters leaned forward, sensing a story that wasn't just about basketball. The questions came quickly at first. How did it feel to come off the bench and change the game? What did you see that no one else saw? What made you pass, instead of taking the final shot? Jamal answered each with a kind of quiet clarity. Nothing showy, no cliches. His voice was steady but thoughtful, like each word had been lived long before it was spoken. And then came the question that quieted the room. A middle-aged reporter with a faded press badge, his voice steady and direct, leaned into the mic and asked, "Jamal, weren't you angry about being benched for most of the game? Especially after carrying the team all season?" For a brief second, there was silence, the kind that hangs when everyone realizes the question matters more than the others. Jamal looked at him. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not with arrogance, but with something softer, like he understood why the question was being asked because he had asked it himself too once. He leaned into the mic and said, "Being angry doesn't win games. Understanding does." Another pause. Then, almost casually, he reached into his bag and pulled out the now familiar notebook. Its corners were worn, the edges curled from use. It wasn't pristine, it was real. He held it up, flipping it open. Inside were rows and rows of sketches, arrows, observations. Plays drawn out in precise formations, notes about rotations, tendencies, even the emotional states of certain teammates mid-game. Not a single word of complaint, not one angry sentence, no scrawled frustrations or crossed-out rants, just strategy, discipline, preparation. He tapped the pages gently with his finger. "I didn't spend the first half being mad," he said. "I spent it trying to understand how to win." There it was, simple, unmistakable. The room shifted. Reporters lowered their pens slightly, some blinking slower than before. A cameraman adjusted his angle as if suddenly realizing this wasn't a normal post-game interview. This was something else, something that might outlive the score. "1," reporter whispered under his breath. "Damn." Coach Tom, seated just a few feet away, looked at Jamal like he was seeing the boy, no, the young man, for the first time all season. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. The regret was already softening the lines on his face. Coach Maya caught Jamal's eyes briefly from the side of the room. She gave the smallest of nods. Outside the press room, the night was cooling, fast. Students were still gathered in clumps, replaying the shot, recording TikToks, jumping up and down in celebration. But in this room, the mood had changed. What started as a sports story had become something more. A lesson. About poise under pressure. About the strength to lead when no one asks you to. About not mistaking silence for passivity, or humility for weakness. When the conference ended and the last flashbulb popped, Jamal stepped down from the table and walked back toward the team, his notebook still in hand. A few younger players looked at him differently now, not like a teammate, but like a standard. Terrence bumped his shoulder and whispered, "You should be team captain next year." Jamal didn't answer. He just handed his notebook to Eli. "You'll need this," he said with a small grin. Eli blinked. "For what?" Jamal gave him a look that said everything without needing words. "For next season," he said. "It's your turn to understand." The championship banners still hung untouched in the Fairview High Gymnasium, swaying lightly with the morning breeze that filtered in through the cracked upper windows. The court had been swept clean, but the silence now wasn't hollow. It was sacred. Coach Tom stood alone at center court. He wasn't wearing his usual whistle or clipboard, just a plain gray hoodie and track pants, his sneakers squeaking quietly as he walked slowly across the floor. His gaze drifted to the bleachers, the same ones that had once echoed with chants, doubt, and triumph. In his hand was the notebook. Jamal's notebook. It felt heavier than it looked. Not in weight, but in meaning. Every page he'd flipped through, over the past few days, had left a small crack in his chest. Like peeling back the cover had exposed not just Jamal's mind, but his patience, his grace. And Tom knew now what he hadn't before. He sat on the bottom bleacher, the same spot where he'd once made decisions in silence, where he'd once watched Jamal warm up alone, isolated, uninvited, unseen, The door creaked behind him. "Coach." Maya stepped in, her arms crossed gently, not confrontational this time, but curious. "You're early," she said. Tom didn't look at her. He just nodded, running a thumb over the notebook's spine. "Can't sleep much since the game." She sat beside him. Long silence. Then, without prompting, he said quietly, "I thought I was teaching him discipline." The words hung there, fragile and unfinished. Then he added, voice breaking just a little, "Turns out he taught me leadership." Maya looked at him, but she didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just listened, because some lessons don't need applause. They only need space to be spoken. Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I saw flashiness in him. I saw risk. I thought, if I kept him under control, I could shape him into the kind of player who wins quietly, the kind who listens first. He laughed once, hollow, bitter. Turns out he was already doing that, I just wasn't listening to him. There it was, the truth, raw and unwrapped. He turned the notebook to a page near the back. A drawing, simple, hand-sketched, but clear. A final play, the one Jamal had called in the last possession. It had Eli's name circled at the corner 3 and under it a small note. "He's ready. Trust him." Tom stared at the words as if they were written in another language. Maybe they had been, the language of leadership, the kind he hadn't known how to speak until it was spoken for him, and not loudly, not from a podium, but in silence, in discipline, in the willingness to pass instead of shoot, to step back so someone else could rise. Coach Maya spoke gently. "What are you going to do with it?" He looked down at the notebook, then at the court. "I'm going to give it back," he said. "But not yet. First, I want to learn from it." That afternoon, the team gathered in the film room, expecting another highlight reel breakdown or maybe a stats-heavy postseason review. Instead, Coach Tom walked in carrying only one thing. He held it up without explanation. Jamal's notebook, and then he said plainly, "This is what leadership looks like." The room stilled. He set it down on the front desk and opened it to a random page. Play diagrams, player notes, mindsets, encouragements, even scouting tips from away games. This entire season, Jamal was studying all of us, supporting us, never asking for credit, never asking for anything. His voice tightened. While I was trying to teach him structure, he was teaching me what real leaders do. They don't speak first. They listen. They lift others. And sometimes, he paused, they win games by not needing to take the final shot. The players looked around, some eyes already glassy. Eli shifted in his seat. Terrence rubbed his chin. Jamal, sitting quietly near the back, said nothing. He didn't need to, because finally, he had been seen. Coach Tom nodded toward him. "Next season, we're changing a few things, and we're starting by naming a new team captain." He didn't need to say the name. The team erupted anyway, but Jamal didn't smile big. He didn't stand. He just nodded once, like always. Later that day, as the sun dropped low and the halls began to empty for the summer, Coach Tom caught up with him outside the gym. Jamal was seated on the edge of the steps, headphones around his neck, notebook finally back in his hands. Tom sat down beside him. Quiet, no ceremony, just two people sharing the silence that often says more than words. He cleared his throat. "You're going to be a better coach than I ever was one day," he said. Jamal looked sideways at him, a little surprised. Tom grinned faintly. "Not because of how well you play, but because you see people. And that's the part I missed." Jamal was quiet a moment. Then he finally asked, "Do you think they'll remember the shot?" Coach Tom shook his head slowly. "No. They'll remember the pass. Because greatness isn't about being seen, it's about seeing. And true leaders, they rise, not when they're praised, but when they lift others, even in silence."